My name is Adrian Whitmore, and at 70 years old I believed there were very few surprises left in life. I'd survived recessions, lawsuits, market crashes, and competitors who spent decades trying to destroy everything I'd built. None of them succeeded. Yet the greatest betrayal of my life didn't come from a rival. It came from my own son. Looking back now, I realize the warning signs had been there all along. I simply refused to see them because I was a father before I was a businessman. That mistake nearly cost me everything. If you're watching this, let me ask you something. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you never imagined they were quietly preparing to betray you? If you have, then you'll understand exactly how this story begins. It was a Tuesday evening in early October. The clock on my office wall read 6 o'clock. Outside the windows of Whitmore Development Group, the city glowed beneath the setting sun. Glass towers reflected shades of orange and gold while traffic crawled through downtown like ribbons of light. Most employees had already gone home. The executive floor was silent. I sat alone in my office staring at the framed photograph on my desk. It showed a younger version of me holding a little boy on my shoulders at the groundbreaking ceremony of my very first commercial building. That little boy was my son, Ethan. Back then he believed I could accomplish anything. Back then I believed I was building a future for both of us. Today was my 70th birthday. Not the kind of milestone a man reaches every year. I wasn't expecting a lavish celebration. I didn't need expensive gifts or speeches. All I wanted was dinner with my son. I picked up my phone and dialed his direct number. The call rang twice. Ethan speaking. His voice sounded distracted. Busy. Or at least he wanted it to sound that way. "How's everything going?" I asked warmly. "Pretty hectic today." I figured. I smiled. I thought maybe after work we could celebrate my birthday. Just the two of us. Prime House is still open. We haven't had one of their steaks in years. There was silence. Then came a tired sigh. "Dad, I'm really sorry. I wish I could. I'm still buried in paperwork. The city rejected part of the Harbor District proposal this afternoon. My team's scrambling to revise everything before tomorrow. I honestly don't think I'll leave the office before midnight." His explanation sounded reasonable. In fact, it sounded exactly like something I would have said 30 years earlier. I leaned back in my chair. "No problem. Business comes first. We'll celebrate another day." "You sure?" "Of course. You've got responsibilities now." "I understand. Happy birthday, Dad. I'll make it up to you. I promise." The line disconnected. For several moments I simply stared at my reflection in the office window. 70 years. 45 of them spent building Whitmore Development from a one-man construction company into one of the largest commercial real estate firms in the region. I'd sacrificed weekends, vacations, anniversaries, school plays, baseball games, everything. Every missed moment carried one justification. I'm doing it for my family. At least that's what I kept telling myself. Maybe I believed it because admitting the truth would have hurt too much. The truth was simpler. I loved building things. Buildings. Businesses. Dreams. I convinced myself those accomplishments could replace time. But children don't remember balance sheets. They remember who showed up. Perhaps that was where I first failed as a father. My assistant had already left for the evening. The office lights automatically dimmed. I could have driven home, ordered takeout, watched another meaningless television program in an empty mansion. Instead I grabbed my coat. "If I'm going to spend my birthday alone," I muttered, "I might as well eat a decent steak." Prime House occupied the top floor of the prestigious Lexington Hotel. I'd been dining there for almost 25 years. The valet greeted me by name. The maitre d' smiled the moment I entered. "Good evening, Mr. Whitmore. And happy birthday." "Thank you." He glanced toward the dining room. Will you be joining the rest of your party? I frowned. My party? Yes, sir. They arrived about half an hour ago. I felt a strange sensation settle in my stomach. There must be some mistake. I don't believe so. They specifically requested one of our private dining booths. Something didn't make sense. I hadn't invited anyone. Perhaps another Whitmore had made reservations. Perhaps. No. The expression on the maitre d's face suggested certainty. He gestured politely toward the back of the restaurant. I thanked him and walked inside. The atmosphere felt warm and elegant. Soft piano music drifted through hidden speakers. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath chandeliers. Servers glided between tables carrying silver trays. I recognized many of the regular guests. Business leaders, judges, developers, people I'd known for decades. As I walked deeper into the restaurant, I heard familiar laughter. A voice. Confident. Relaxed. Comfortable. Ethan. I stopped walking. There he was. Not surrounded by blueprints. Not sitting with engineers. Not reviewing permits. Instead, he occupied the largest private booth in the restaurant. Beside him sat his wife, Vanessa. Across from them sat Vanessa's mother, Lorraine. The table overflowed with food. Fresh lobster, king crab, imported oysters, champagne, wine, desserts. Enough for 6 people. Everyone laughed as though they didn't have a care in the world. For several seconds, I simply watched. Perhaps there was an explanation. Maybe they planned to surprise me. Maybe. Then Lorraine raised her champagne glass. I told you he'd believe anything. Everyone laughed. Vanessa leaned toward Ethan. Did your father suspect anything? He shook his head with a grin. Not even for a second. I told him I was trapped in meetings. He practically apologized for interrupting me. Another round of laughter. Lorraine smiled smugly. The old man still thinks the company can't survive without him. Vanessa smirked. He has no idea what's happening right under his nose. Ethan swirled the champagne thoughtfully. My father built an incredible company. But he's slowing down. He still thinks everyone around him is loyal. Honestly, he notices less every month. The words struck harder than I expected. Not because he lied. People lie. I've negotiated with liars my entire career. What hurt was hearing my own son speak about me as though I were already becoming irrelevant. As though I were simply waiting to disappear. I remained hidden behind a decorative column. Listening. Watching. Learning. Lorraine laughed again. In another year he'll probably hand you everything anyway. Vanessa nodded. He still believes family comes before business. Ethan smiled. Exactly. And that's why he'll never see anything coming. Those words echoed inside my mind. He'll never see anything coming. I suddenly realized something. None of them looked worried. No guilt. No hesitation. No concern that someone might overhear. They felt completely safe. People only become that comfortable when they've been getting away with something for a very long time. The disappointment inside me slowly transformed into something colder, clearer, more dangerous. I spent decades negotiating billion-dollar developments. I learned long ago that emotions cloud judgment. When someone reveals their true character, believe them. I straightened my jacket, adjusted my cuffs, then stepped away from the shadows. Each step toward their table felt deliberate, measured, calm. By the time my shoes stopped beside the booth, my decision had already been made. For a brief moment, none of them noticed me. Lorraine was still laughing. Vanessa had lifted her champagne glass. Ethan reached for another piece of lobster. Then my shadow stretched across the white tablecloth. The laughter stopped. Ethan looked up first. The confidence vanished from his face so quickly it was almost frightening. His hand froze halfway to his wineglass, and the smile he'd worn only seconds earlier dissolved into complete disbelief. "Dad." The single word barely escaped his lips. Vanessa turned. The color drained from her face. Lorraine looked between the three of us, suddenly unsure whether to smile or pretend she hadn't heard everything they'd just said. I remained perfectly calm. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone. Instead, I looked around the beautifully arranged table. Lobster. Imported oysters. Vintage champagne. I nodded slowly. It certainly doesn't look like city planning paperwork. Nobody answered. The silence became unbearable. Several nearby diners had already started glancing toward our table. Prime House wasn't a place where people argued loudly. Everyone understood the value of reputation. Ethan finally stood. "Dad. I can explain." "I'm sure you can. I was going to tell you." "Were you?" He swallowed hard. "This dinner wasn't planned." Lorraine shifted uncomfortably. "It was my idea," she interrupted. "I wanted to celebrate with the family. I insisted Ethan come." I looked directly at her. "You insisted he lie to me?" She immediately looked away. Vanessa quickly joined in. "Please don't blame Ethan. He didn't want to disappoint you. He was trying to keep everyone happy." I almost smiled. Interesting. Within less than 30 seconds, both women had attempted to shield Ethan from responsibility. Not because they loved him. Because they needed him. That told me everything. Ethan stepped closer. "Dad, let's talk outside. I don't want to make a scene." "A scene?" I glanced around the table again. "I don't believe I'm the one who created this situation." Another long silence followed. The waiter cautiously approached. He had clearly sensed something was wrong. "Excuse me, sir. Would anyone care for dessert?" Nobody answered. The poor young man awkwardly backed away. I noticed something resting beside Ethan's plate. A sleek black corporate payment card. Whitmore Development Group. Executive account. My eyes lingered on it. Ethan followed my gaze. His expression changed instantly. He knew I'd seen it. "Dad. It's not what you think." "Really?" I reached toward the table. No one moved. The card felt cold in my hand. I remembered approving the executive expense program years earlier. It existed for client meetings, investor dinners, contract negotiations. Never family celebrations. Never birthday parties I wasn't invited to. I slowly turned the card over. The company logo reflected beneath the restaurant lights. 45 years of sacrifice. Reduced to this. A personal wallet. "How much?" Ethan hesitated. "What? How much did tonight cost?" He avoided my eyes. Lorraine quietly answered instead. "A little over 4,000. She said it as though discussing grocery shopping. I looked at her. "You seem remarkably comfortable spending someone else's money." Her lips tightened. Vanessa finally lost her patience. "With all due respect, Adrian. Ethan works harder than anyone in your company. If he wants to treat his family to dinner once in a while, I don't see the problem." I turned toward her. "There isn't one." She blinked. "I beg your pardon. The problem isn't dinner. The problem is honesty." I placed the corporate card carefully on the table. Then I looked directly at my son. "I called you because today was my birthday. You chose to lie. I asked for one meal. You chose this." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The confident executive I had promoted years ago had disappeared. Standing before me was a nervous little boy who suddenly realized consequences existed. For the first time all evening, I actually felt sorry for him. Not because he'd been caught. Because somewhere along the way, he'd convinced himself that betraying me carried no real cost. That realization belonged to me. I'd created that illusion. I'll reimburse the company tomorrow. Ethan spoke quietly. I promise. I nodded once. I expect you will. Then I gently pushed the corporate card back toward him. I don't need it anymore. His eyes narrowed. What do you mean? I'll have accounting deactivate every executive expense card before business opens tomorrow. The blood drained from his face. Dad. This isn't necessary. No. It isn't. But it's happening. Lorraine leaned forward. Surely we're overreacting. It was only dinner. I looked at her. No. It wasn't. It was trust. And trust is considerably more expensive. Without another word, I turned around. I heard Ethan call after me. Dad. I kept walking. The maitre d' hurried toward the entrance. Mr. Whitmore. Your table is ready. I smiled politely. Thank you. I've lost my appetite. The drive home felt strangely peaceful. The city lights blurred past my windshield. Normally, I would have replayed every painful word. Instead, I found myself analyzing details. Tiny details. How quickly Ethan lied. How naturally Vanessa defended him. How comfortable Lorraine seemed spending corporate money. None of this felt spontaneous. It felt practiced. Habits rarely begin with $1,000 dinners. They begin with small compromises. One unauthorized expense. One harmless lie. One overlooked signature. Over time, those habits become lifestyles. By the time someone grows bold enough to laugh at you publicly, they've already convinced themselves you'll never fight back. My home overlooked the river. People called it a mansion. I preferred calling it quiet. Far too quiet. I entered through the front doors. The security system chimed softly. The hallway lights illuminated automatically. Portraits of my late wife lined the staircase. Emily. She'd been gone nearly 12 years. Some nights I still caught myself expecting to hear her voice. She always understood people better than I did. Business taught me numbers. Emily taught me character. Had she lived longer, would she have seen what I refused to notice? I honestly didn't know. I walked into my study. The room smelled of leather, cedar, and old books. A place where thousands of decisions had shaped an empire. I poured myself a single glass of bourbon. Not to forget. To think. I never made important decisions while angry. Anger creates mistakes. Information creates victories. Tonight wasn't about revenge. Not yet. Tonight was about understanding. I opened my laptop. Logged into the executive financial dashboard. Normally, I reviewed quarterly reports. Tonight, I searched for something much smaller. Executive expense accounts. One card. One name. Ethan Whitmore. The first transaction appeared. Prime House. $4,183.62. Approved automatically. I stared at the date. Then I noticed something else. Another dinner. 6 weeks earlier. Nearly $3,000. Different restaurant. Same executive card. Another luxury hotel. Private wine club. Jewelry boutique. Weekend resort. Golf membership. None of those expenses had client names attached. No business purpose. No supporting documentation. I leaned back slowly. The steakhouse wasn't the beginning. It was simply the first time I'd witnessed it myself. Which raised one question. If this was only what appeared on the surface, what existed beneath it? I closed the laptop. Tomorrow morning. I wasn't going to confront my son. I was going to audit my company. And something deep inside told me. The numbers were about to reveal a story far uglier than a birthday dinner. I arrived at Whitmore Development Group before sunrise. For nearly 45 years, that had been my routine. When the city was still asleep, I found clarity. The executive parking garage echoed with the sound of my footsteps as I crossed toward the private elevator. Usually, the quiet gave me comfort. This morning, it carried a different feeling. Suspicion. As the elevator climbed toward the top floor, I replayed the previous night's dinner in my mind. Not with anger. With curiosity. Successful businessmen don't survive by reacting emotionally. They survive by asking better questions. Why had Ethan looked genuinely nervous only after I noticed the corporate card? Why had Vanessa and Lorraine answered so quickly on his behalf? Why had none of them seemed surprised that the bill would be charged to the company? Those weren't the reactions of people making a first mistake. Those were the reactions of people protecting an established routine. The elevator doors opened. My longtime executive assistant, Margaret Collins, looked up from her desk with her usual warm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." Then she paused. "Happy belated birthday." "Thank you, Margaret." She studied my face. "You look like you barely slept." I didn't. She had worked beside me for 22 years. If anyone could read my expressions, it was Margaret. "Everything all right?" I managed a small smile. "I'm about to find out." She knew better than to ask another question. Instead, she quietly handed me the morning schedule. Inside my office, I ignored the stack of contracts waiting on my desk. Instead, I opened my secure terminal. Every financial movement inside Whitmore Development eventually passed through this system. Very few people knew that even after stepping back from day-to-day operations, I had retained unrestricted executive access. I typed Ethan's employee credentials into the internal audit portal. The system hesitated. Then a notification appeared. Executive override required. Interesting. Ethan had requested additional financial permissions 6 months earlier. I remembered approving them. At the time, it felt like a logical step. He was the future president of the company. Why wouldn't he need broader authority? Now I wished I had asked more questions. I entered my authorization code. Thousands of transactions appeared. For a moment, I simply stared. The numbers themselves weren't alarming. Large companies process millions of dollars every week. Patterns mattered more than totals. I sorted the expenses by vendor. One company immediately caught my attention. Northbridge Strategic Consulting. Over the last 11 months, payments totaled $612,000. I frowned. The name meant nothing to me. Whitmore Development worked with dozens of consulting firms. Yet I couldn't remember ever approving Northbridge. I opened the vendor profile. Registered less than a year ago. Minimal business history. No completed project reports. No engineering files. No architectural reviews. Only invoices. Expensive invoices. Very expensive invoices. Every single one approved personally by Ethan. I leaned back slowly. One unusual vendor didn't prove anything. But it justified looking deeper. At exactly 8:30, someone knocked. "Come in." Ethan stepped inside carrying 2 coffees. His smile looked carefully rehearsed. "Morning, Dad. I figured you could use this." He placed my favorite coffee beside the desk. Exactly the way he always had. A thoughtful gesture. Or perhaps, an attempt to erase yesterday. He sat down before I invited him. "I've been thinking about last night." "So have I. I'm ashamed. I handled everything badly. I should have been with you. I simply listened. I'm going to reimburse every dollar. I already called accounting." I don't want one stupid decision to damage our relationship. His apology sounded convincing. If I hadn't overheard that conversation at Prime House, I might have believed him. Instead, I watched his eyes, his breathing, the slight delay before every answer. Negotiation had taught me something priceless. People reveal themselves between sentences, not during them. I folded my hands. Ethan. Yes. Tell me about Northbridge Strategic Consulting. The question hit him like a slap. Only for a fraction of a second. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. His pupils widened, then immediately returned to normal. Oh. Northbridge. They're handling some market feasibility studies. For which project? The Riverside expansion. I nodded. When were their reports submitted? Another pause. They're still compiling everything. Really? Yes. I'd like to review their preliminary findings this afternoon. His confidence faltered. I'll have to check with them. No need. I'll contact them personally. His smile disappeared. They're probably traveling. I'll wait. Silence settled over the office. Finally, Ethan stood. I'll get everything organized. I'm sure you will. He left without touching his coffee. The moment the door closed, I reached for my notebook. One sentence. He lied. Not because I knew anything about Northbridge. Because he answered too quickly. Honest people search for information. Liars search for stories. 5 minutes later my private phone rang. The caller ID displayed one name. Daniel Mercer. Daniel had served as Whitmore Development's outside legal counsel for nearly 3 decades. He defended us through acquisitions, lawsuits, and hostile takeovers. More importantly, he'd never lied to me. Good morning. You sounded serious in your message. I am. I need complete discretion. You have it. I want a confidential financial review. Of whom? My son. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Finally he spoke quietly. I was afraid you'd say that. You've noticed something? I've noticed changes. What kind? He requests legal approvals he never used to need. He pushes contracts through unusually fast. I assumed you'd instructed him. I didn't. Another silence. I'll assemble a forensic accounting team. No one inside the company can know. Understood. I want every payment Ethan has approved during the last 18 months. Every vendor. Every invoice. Every wire transfer. Daniel inhaled slowly. If there is something hidden, we'll find it. I know. By lunchtime, I forced myself to continue acting normally. The board expected stability. Employees watched leadership constantly. One careless expression could create unnecessary rumors. During the executive operations meeting, Ethan delivered his quarterly presentation with flawless confidence. Revenue projections. Construction schedules. Investment forecasts. On the surface, everything looked impressive. Yet I noticed something different now. Whenever anyone asked detailed financial questions, he redirected them. He promised supplemental reports later. He relied heavily on summaries. Broad numbers. Never specifics. I'd never paid attention before. Today, I noticed every shortcut, every omission, every carefully avoided detail. When the meeting ended, department heads congratulated Ethan on another successful quarter. He smiled, accepted praise, shook hands. Watching him, I realized something painful. He truly believed he was untouchable. Not because he'd become smarter than me. Because I'd stopped looking. Late that afternoon, Margaret entered carrying a sealed envelope. This arrived by courier. No return address. Inside was a flash drive. Nothing else. No letter. No explanation. Just a small handwritten note. Ask who really owns Northbridge. I read it twice. Margaret noticed my expression. Bad news. I don't know yet. After she left, I inserted the drive into an isolated computer disconnected from the company network. Dozens of scanned documents appeared. Corporate registrations. Bank transfers. Property records. At first they seemed unrelated. Then one name appeared repeatedly. Lorraine Hastings. Vanessa's mother. According to the documents, she wasn't merely enjoying expensive dinners. She held ownership interests in multiple shell companies. One of them was Northbridge Strategic Consulting. I stared at the screen. The consulting company, receiving hundreds of thousands of corporate dollars, was secretly connected to my daughter-in-law's family. A chill spread through my office. Yesterday, I thought this story was about betrayal. Today, it was beginning to look like something much larger. Something planned. Something deliberate. I closed the files and looked out across the skyline. For the first time in my career, I wasn't preparing to defend my company from outside competitors. I was preparing to defend it from my own family. And deep down, I had the unsettling feeling that I had only uncovered the smallest piece of the truth. The office felt unusually quiet after Margaret left. I remained seated, staring at the files on the encrypted flash drive. One shell company connected to Lorraine could have been a coincidence. 2 raised questions. 3 became a pattern. Northbridge Strategic Consulting wasn't operating alone. The financial records referenced several related businesses, each registered in different states within months of one another. Their names sounded legitimate enough: real estate consulting firms, design agencies, development advisors, but none of them had meaningful online footprints. No offices. No completed projects. No employees. Only bank accounts. I reached for the phone. Margaret. She answered immediately. Yes, Mr. Whitmore. I don't want any interruptions for the next 2 hours. Of course. And if Ethan asks where I am, I'll tell him you're reviewing investor reports. She paused. Is everything all right? I'll know soon enough. I picked up another file. Every payment eventually led back to one destination: a private investment trust. The trust itself wasn't illegal. Its beneficiaries, however, had been intentionally hidden. Someone had spent considerable effort burying ownership beneath layers of paperwork. That alone told me whoever built this structure understood financial law. This wasn't amateur theft. It had been planned. Carefully. Patiently. Methodically. My office door opened without warning. Daniel Mercer stepped inside carrying a thick leather briefcase. His expression told me everything before he spoke. We've already found problems. Worse than expected. He nodded. Much worse. He placed several folders across my desk. I kept only the highlights. The full audit is nearly 1,200 pages. I slowly opened the first folder. What am I looking at? Daniel adjusted his glasses. 18 months of financial activity. Every transaction personally approved by Ethan. I skimmed the summary. Marketing contracts. Property assessments. Consulting agreements. Interior planning. Risk evaluations. On paper, everything appeared legitimate. Then I noticed the totals. Nearly $3.8 million. I looked back at Daniel. Tell me these projects exist. They don't. They're fabricated. Not entirely. Some projects are real. But the invoices aren't. He slid another document toward me. We hired independent investigators. They physically visited every listed office. And Daniel's face hardened. Half the addresses don't exist. The others belong to virtual office services. No employees. No equipment. No business activity. Just mailboxes. I slowly closed the folder. So Ethan created fake vendors. Daniel shook his head. Not necessarily. We still don't know who created them. But someone inside Whitmore Development approved every payment. And every approval carries Ethan's digital signature. Silence settled over the room. For nearly a minute neither of us spoke. Finally I asked the question I had been avoiding. Could someone be framing him? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened another folder. Inside sat copies of electronic authorizations. Each one contained Ethan's encrypted executive credentials. Impossible to forge without direct access. He approved them himself. There was no emotion in Daniel's voice. Only facts. Cold. Unavoidable facts. I stood and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. 43 stories below, thousands of people hurried through the afternoon streets. Parents. Workers. Students. Strangers. Every one of them fighting battles no one else could see. Mine just happened to involve an empire. I thought about Ethan as a child. His first bicycle. His graduation. The day I handed him his first office key. I remembered how proud I felt watching him move into the executive suite. Employees applauded. Investors congratulated me. Everyone said the company was secure for another generation. Had I been celebrating? Or surrendering? Daniel broke the silence. There's something else. I turned around. He hesitated. I wasn't sure whether to tell you today. Tell me. We traced several wire transfers. Where did they go? Initially through Northbridge. Then, they ended in personal accounts. Whose? Daniel slid over another page. The first name didn't surprise me. Lorraine Hastings. The second made my chest tighten. Vanessa Whitmore. Not company bonuses. Not salaries. Direct transfers. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Luxury vehicle purchases. Vacation homes. Investment accounts. Private memberships. Everything financed indirectly through fake corporate invoices. I looked back at Daniel. Ethan knows. He signed every authorization. The office suddenly felt smaller. Not because of the evidence. Because of what it represented. This wasn't careless spending. This wasn't one dishonest dinner. This was systematic. Organized. Intentional. Someone had been quietly draining Whitmore Development while convincing me everything was running smoothly. Daniel cleared his throat. I've handled corporate fraud cases for 30 years. I've seen executives steal from shareholders. I've seen partners bankrupt companies. But family. He shook his head. Family cases are always the ugliest. A soft knock interrupted us. Margaret entered carefully. Sorry to interrupt. Ethan is asking if you're available. Daniel immediately closed the folders. I looked at him. Hide everything. Within seconds the documents disappeared into his briefcase. Send him in. Margaret nodded. Moments later Ethan entered smiling. There you are. I've been looking everywhere. His confidence had returned. Apparently yesterday's confrontation hadn't shaken him for long. I wanted your opinion on tomorrow's investor luncheon. I gestured toward the chair. Sit. He did. Daniel remained silent in the corner. Ethan. Yes. How long have you been working with Northbridge? His smile barely moved. About a year. They've been excellent. What exactly do? They identify market opportunities. For which developments? He named 3 projects. Daniel quietly wrote something on his notepad. Every project Ethan mentioned had never employed Northbridge. Another lie. Confident. Effortless. Professional. I leaned back. And you've met their executives? Several times. What are their names? For the first time. He hesitated. It's been a while. I'd have to check. Daniel and I exchanged a quick glance. That was enough. A man doesn't forget the names of consultants responsible for millions of dollars in company spending. Unless they never existed. After Ethan left, Daniel finally spoke. He doesn't realize you're testing him. No. He thinks I'm still trusting. Daniel nodded slowly. That could become our advantage. I stared at the city again. An advantage. Perhaps. But it came with a painful cost. Every answer uncovered another lie. Every lie erased another memory of the son I thought I knew. By sunset, the forensic team delivered another encrypted report. This one contained internal emails. Nothing illegal. Nothing incriminating. Just conversations. Patterns. Private exchanges. One message stood out. It had been sent by Vanessa to Ethan late one evening. Only one sentence. He's finally stepping back. Just stay patient a little longer. No context. No explanation. But it chilled me nonetheless. Stepping back. Patient. Those weren't the words of people hoping for a peaceful retirement. Those were the words of people waiting for control. Daniel looked at me carefully. We're dealing with something bigger than financial fraud. I know. I can feel it. But feelings aren't evidence. He nodded. So what do we do? I looked down at the growing stack of reports. For decades, I had defeated competitors by acting too quickly. This time, speed would be my enemy. No confrontations. Not yet. We keep watching. We let them believe everything is normal. Daniel studied me. You have a plan. Not yet. But I will. Because one thing had become absolutely clear. People willing to steal millions rarely stop there. If Ethan and the others were hiding this much, then somewhere beneath the surface, there was still a secret they were protecting. And I intended to find it before they realized I was no longer the man they believed they were deceiving. The following week unfolded with surprising calm. Too calm. If someone had walked into Whitmore Development during those days, they would have believed everything was operating perfectly. Construction crews remained on schedule. Executives attended meetings. Investors praised our quarterly performance. Employees smiled as they passed Ethan in the hallways, congratulating him on another successful quarter. To everyone else, Whitmore Development looked stronger than ever. But beneath that polished surface, a silent investigation was gaining momentum. Daniel Mercer had assembled a small forensic team made up of professionals who had never worked with our company before. Every member signed strict confidentiality agreements. They reported directly to him, and ultimately to me. No emails. No internal memos. No digital trail. Every update arrived in person. If Ethan was monitoring company communications, I wanted him to find nothing. 3 days later, Daniel entered my office carrying another thick folder. His expression was more serious than usual. I think we've identified the center of the operation. I motioned for him to sit. What did you find? He opened the folder and spread several documents across my desk. Northbridge isn't the real destination. It isn't. No. It was only the first layer. He pointed to a flowchart. Corporate payments left Whitmore Development through fake consulting invoices. Those funds were then divided among several shell companies. Finally, they landed inside a private investment partnership. I read the partnership's name twice. Horizon Legacy Holdings. I've never heard of it. I don't think you were supposed to. Daniel handed me another document. This company owns luxury real estate in 3 states. It also controls multiple investment portfolios. Worth. Our conservative estimate. He paused. Nearly $26 million. I looked up sharply. 26 million. He nodded. And most of that money originated from Whitmore Development. The room fell silent. $26 million. Not over decades. Over less than 2 years. Someone hadn't merely been stealing. They had been preparing for a future. Who owns Horizon Legacy? Daniel hesitated. The ownership records are intentionally hidden. But we managed to identify one trustee. He slid over another page. The name didn't surprise me anymore. Lorraine Hastings. I exhaled slowly. And the remaining trustees? We're still tracing them. But we have strong evidence that Vanessa is involved. What about Ethan? Daniel met my eyes. His name doesn't appear. I frowned. Why? Because whoever designed the structure understood liability. They kept his ownership hidden. But his digital approvals funded everything. So if the scheme collapsed, he'd become the obvious target. The realization struck me instantly. Someone had built the operation in a way that protected themselves, while leaving Ethan exposed. Was he a willing participant? Or simply convinced he would eventually share the rewards? For the first time, I wasn't entirely sure. That afternoon I invited Ethan to lunch. Not at Prime House. Not anywhere luxurious. Just a quiet cafe several blocks away. He seemed relieved. Maybe he believed the tension between us had faded. I'm glad you called, he said as we sat down. I've been worried. I know. I never wanted last week to happen. Neither of us mentioned the birthday dinner. Instead, we spoke about ordinary things. Construction schedules. Weather. A recent football game. It reminded me of the conversations we used to have years ago. For a moment, I almost forgot everything. Then Ethan smiled. You know, I've been thinking. I think it's finally time. Time for what? You deserve to enjoy retirement. You've spent your whole life working. You've earned a chance to relax. His tone sounded caring, supportive, but something about the timing felt wrong. I've already started reducing my workload. I know, but maybe it's time to make it official. He leaned forward. The board already sees me as your successor. Investors trust me. If you officially step aside, the transition would be smooth. There it was. The conversation he'd been waiting to have. I stirred my coffee quietly. And if I decide not to? His smile stiffened. You've always said leadership requires knowing when to pass the torch. I did. And I still believe that. But timing matters. He nodded. Of course. I just don't want unnecessary delays. Unnecessary delays. Interesting choice of words. Not when you're ready. Not whenever you feel comfortable. Delays. As though my continued presence had become an inconvenience. That evening Daniel arrived with unexpected news. We identified another participant. Who? He placed a photograph on my desk. A sharply dressed man in his late 40s. Richard Holloway. The name meant nothing to me. Former investment banker. Disbarred. No. He resigned after a federal investigation. Was he charged? Never. But several of his business partners were. Daniel opened another file. Holloway specializes in creating offshore ownership structures. He also helped establish Horizon Legacy Holdings. So he's the architect. Most likely. And there's more. Daniel produced a security photograph. It showed Richard Holloway entering a luxury hotel. Standing beside him was Ethan. The timestamp was only 6 weeks old. I stared at the image. So they know each other. They've met multiple times. Private dinners. Weekend conferences. No company records mention him. Another carefully hidden relationship. Another lie. The next morning Margaret knocked softly. "You have a visitor." "I don't have any appointments." "I know." But she insisted. "Who is it?" Margaret looked unusually uncertain. "A woman named Claire Bennett." The name meant nothing to me. "Does she work here?" "No. She says she has information about your son." I exchanged a glance with Daniel. "Send her in." Moments later a woman in her early 30s entered the office. She looked exhausted. Nervous. She clutched a small envelope tightly in both hands. "My name is Claire. I used to work for Northbridge." That immediately caught my attention. I thought Northbridge had no employees. She gave a sad smile. "It doesn't. I was hired to make it look real." Daniel leaned forward. "What exactly did you do?" I answered phones. Processed fake emails. Scheduled meetings that never happened. Whenever someone called asking about consulting projects, I followed a script. She placed the envelope on my desk. "I quit 3 months ago." "Why?" "Because I realized where the money was coming from." Her hands trembled. I couldn't keep pretending. Inside the envelope were several flash drives and printed bank statements. I copied everything before I left. Daniel carefully opened one of the folders. His expression changed immediately. "What is it?" I asked. He looked at me. "This changes everything." Claire took a deep breath. "I don't think they're just stealing from the company." "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "I think they're preparing to sell it." The room became completely silent. "Sell Whitmore Development." She nodded slowly. I overheard Richard Holloway telling Ethan, "Once the old man signs, we're done." I felt my heartbeat slow. Not speed up. Slow down. Because suddenly, every piece of the puzzle began fitting together. The fake companies. The missing money. The pressure for retirement. The repeated conversations about stepping aside. It had never been about taking control of the company. It was about convincing me to hand over authority, long enough for them to sell the empire I had spent 45 years building. And if Claire was telling the truth, they were much closer to their goal than I had imagined. I looked out across the skyline one more time. For years I had believed my greatest opponents were competitors across the city. I had been wrong. The people trying hardest to destroy everything I built had been sitting at my own dinner table. The morning Claire Bennett walked into my office, everything changed. Not because she had confirmed my suspicions. Because she handed me proof. Daniel carefully examined every document Claire had brought. There were internal emails, banking records, meeting schedules, and copies of contracts that had never passed through Whitmore Development's legal department. One email caught my attention immediately. It had been sent from Richard Holloway to Ethan just 12 days earlier. "Once the chairman signs the transition package, Horizon will activate Phase 3. No explanation. No details. But one phrase stood out. Phase 3. I looked at Daniel. "What was Phase 1? "The fake consulting firms," he replied. "And Phase 2. The transfer of company funds." I slowly folded the paper. "So Phase 3 must be the sale." Daniel nodded. "That's exactly what I think." I didn't confront Ethan. Not yet. Instead, I did something he never expected. I scheduled an emergency board of directors meeting for the following Monday. The official agenda was simple. Succession planning. Within hours the news spread throughout the company. Employees whispered in elevators. Executives speculated in conference rooms. Investors began calling Margaret's office. Everyone assumed I was finally announcing my retirement. Exactly as I intended. When Ethan heard the news, he appeared in my office carrying the biggest smile I'd seen in months. "I heard about Monday." "You did. I'm proud of you." He actually sounded relieved. "I know this couldn't have been an easy decision." I simply nodded. 45 years is a long time. "It is. You've earned some peace." He reached across my desk and shook my hand. "I promise I'll protect everything you've built." I looked directly into his eyes. "I hope you do." For a brief second, something about my tone made him hesitate. Then he smiled again. "I won't let you down." As he left, I quietly said to myself, "You already have." Over the next 4 days, Daniel and I worked almost non-stop. Every piece of evidence was verified. Every financial trail was documented. Every fraudulent invoice was matched to bank transfers. Claire identified signatures. Independent accountants prepared forensic reports. Outside attorneys reviewed every conclusion. By Sunday evening, we had assembled nearly 2,000 pages of evidence. If anyone challenged our findings, the documents would answer for us. Monday arrived. The executive boardroom overlooked the entire city. Floor-to-ceiling windows surrounded a long walnut conference table. Every director attended. Major investors joined remotely. Department heads waited outside. Even Ethan wore a tailored navy suit I'd never seen before. He looked like a man preparing to inherit an empire. Vanessa sat quietly near the back of the room as an invited guest. Lorraine wasn't present. Neither was Richard Holloway. That didn't matter. Their names would arrive soon enough. At precisely 9 o'clock, I stood. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. I know many of you believe today's meeting concerns my retirement." Several board members nodded. "It does." A smile appeared on Ethan's face. But not in the way anyone expects. The room became silent. I pressed a button on the conference table. The large presentation screen illuminated. The first slide appeared. Unauthorized corporate payments. Ethan's smile disappeared. For the past 18 months, Whitmore Development has been the victim of an organized financial fraud. Whispers spread across the room. The next slide appeared. A chart showing millions of dollars flowing into shell companies. Another slide. Northbridge Strategic Consulting. Another. Horizon Legacy Holdings. Then photographs. Bank statements. Wire transfers. Executive approvals. Every document displayed one unmistakable pattern. Digital authorizations bearing Ethan's credentials. He suddenly stood. "Dad. There has to be some mistake." "There isn't. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." I looked toward Daniel. He handed each board member a bound copy of the forensic report. "The evidence has already been independently verified." No one spoke. Page after page turned. Expressions changed. Confusion became disbelief. Disbelief became anger. One director finally broke the silence. "Ethan, did you authorize these payments?" His voice shook. They were legitimate consulting expenses. Daniel calmly replied, "We visited every listed office. They don't exist." Another director looked toward Ethan. "What about Horizon Legacy?" "I've never owned it." "No," I answered quietly. "You didn't. But your wife and mother-in-law benefited from nearly every transfer." Vanessa's face turned pale. She looked at Ethan. He looked at her. Neither said a word. The silence said enough. I pressed another button. A recorded audio file began playing. Richard Holloway's voice filled the room. Once Adrian signs the transition agreement, Horizon acquires controlling interest within 48 hours. Then Ethan's voice. So everything will already be in place? Richard laughed. He'll never know what happened until it's finished. The recording ended. Complete silence. No one moved. No one even breathed. Ethan slowly lowered himself back into his chair. For the first time in his life, he had no explanation. After several long seconds, he finally spoke. I never wanted this. His voice was barely audible. Richard convinced me. Vanessa interrupted. Don't blame him now. He turned toward her. You said it was temporary. You said we'd fix everything after Dad retired. Lorraine's name surfaced repeatedly as the board questioned the documents. It became painfully clear that greed had pulled everyone deeper than they ever intended. But the signatures, the approvals, the responsibility, still belonged to Ethan. I looked around the boardroom. For 45 years, I've believed buildings were the strongest things a person could create. I paused. I was wrong. Trust is stronger. And once it's broken, it's almost impossible to rebuild. I removed a folder from my briefcase. This company will continue. But not under the leadership of anyone who placed personal gain above integrity. I handed the folder to the board secretary. Effective immediately, Ethan Whitmore is removed from all executive authority pending legal proceedings. No one objected. The vote was unanimous. Ethan looked at me. Not as an executive. Not as a businessman. Simply as my son. I'm sorry. The words sounded genuine. Perhaps for the first time in months. Maybe years. I believed he regretted what had happened. I simply wasn't sure whether he regretted the betrayal. Or getting caught. There was a time, I said quietly, when I would have done anything to protect you. I took a slow breath. But protecting you should never have meant sacrificing everyone else who trusted this company. Security entered the room. Not dramatically. Not forcefully. Professionally. Ethan stood without resistance. Before leaving, he stopped beside me. I hope one day you can forgive me. I looked out across the skyline. I hope one day you become someone I can. He nodded once and walked away. Months later, Whitmore Development recovered. The stolen assets were largely reclaimed through court orders and frozen accounts. Daniel remained the company's chief legal advisor. Claire accepted a permanent position leading our corporate compliance department. As for me, I didn't retire. Not immediately. Instead, I spent the next year rebuilding something more important than buildings. A culture where accountability mattered more than titles. Where character carried greater weight than family names. Because I had finally learned a lesson that took 70 years to understand. Success can build an empire. But integrity is what keeps it standing.